In today's video, we're going to be taking a look here at the upcoming pattern, taking a look at a very cold pattern, especially as we enter into the early portion of January. But we think the worst of it could be coming for the midpoint of January, as we're going to be taking a look at some long-range model guidance here within this video. We also think this is going to bring about threats for major snowstorms, and it really could happen anywhere in the eastern half of the nation. This is going to likely, in my opinion, be one of the top 3 coldest and snowiest patterns of the winter. So our one of our best opportunities, if not maybe the best opportunity for snow, is going to come between the 1st and 15th of January. And I know that might seem obvious, a lot of years it is, but a lot of times you could see a warmer spell at any point during the winter. This looks to be our cold and snowy point, perhaps here this upcoming winter is the way that I see it. And more might come in later January or February, but I think this early to mid portion of January is going to be really active. So let's take a look here first off at the past 20 days to give us an idea of how the pattern has kind of acted so far. And we see a positive P&A has kind of dominated the pattern here, which is warmer temperatures in the west, forcing the cold from Canada down into the Midwest, the Great Lakes, the Ohio Valley, the Southeast, and even some of it moving towards the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic here. So we've seen it really spread throughout this eastern area so far. We are very cold right now, so we actually expect a lot of these areas to get even bluer as the rest of the month kind of rolls in here. We're going to take a look at a lot of what the National Weather Service has to say today, because it aligns greatly with exactly what I've been kind of preaching to you guys. First off, the 6 to 10 day outlook is going to cover the 29th through the 2nd of January, kind of just before we expect this deep cold to move in. And we've expected that an after Christmas time frame this year is expected to be quite warm. And we see a lot of that from coast to coast, but especially in the east here on this outlook, which has been issued just today. So this is the freshest, most up-to-date information from the National Weather Service. When we transition to the 8 to 14 day outlook, which is going to cover the 31st of December straight through the 6th, we see that things look dramatically different. We see perhaps this positive P&A pattern trying to set back up over the west. We see cooler temperatures for some of the northern Rockies and Plains. A little bit of in between here. They're kind of equal chances. They don't have confidence in either direction here. But we do see that this looks a lot colder. Even in the southeast here, we see some blues and slightly red or orange here over the northeast. But this looks a lot colder than this. So I think that this is going to be a transition period, especially December 31st through about like the 3rd or 4th. But when we look at their 3 to 4 week outlook, which came out just a few days ago, which covers January 4th through 17th, we get kind of engulfed into a purely positive P&A pattern here. Warmer temperatures across the southwest, forcing a lot of this cold right into the eastern states here, just like what we've seen throughout a lot of December, although I think it's going to be a lot colder even during this time frame. So as we just transition here into the model guidance, we're going to take a look here at this evening first off, as we're transitioning into Christmas Eve, and we do see some snowfall taking place across the upper Midwest, Great Lakes, portions of eastern Canada here, and this is going to spread in through portions of the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast as well. We do see some snowfall kind of in the air here for the northern Rockies mostly. Let's take a look at what happens as we move towards the morning hour. I'm going to take a look at 7 a.m. here tomorrow on Tuesday, Christmas Eve. What we see here is some light to moderate, even heavy snowfall taking place from West Virginia, Pennsylvania, New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, maybe a little bit of Connecticut there, and then Maine as well, seeing that heavier snowfall taking place. So some areas in here seeing a white Christmas as a result of a lot of this snowfall that has gone ahead and come down, or it's going to here overnight tonight into tomorrow. We also see that meanwhile a more major storm system is moving on toward the northwest here, especially western Canada, but also the western, northwestern United States there. Snowfall across the mountain ranges, obviously rainfall in the more coastal and lower elevation regions. We do see by the time we reach the afternoon hour that only worsens. We see Sierra Nevada mountains seeing heavier snowfall. And by tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern, we see that a lot of that snowfall has kind of started to die down across the Northeast. We're still relatively cold though. We do see for Christmas Day, this is kind of what we're expecting, some snowfall across the central Rockies and also kind of the Northwest here. So Precipitation in those two areas. Also, kind of seeing some of this across the deep south into the Ohio Valley and Midwest here. Some showers around for these regions. Still relatively cold, especially for this pocket here. Again, pay attention to the ridges and dips, and we see a lot of dippage happening as we approach the East Coast, which is telling us that we're seeing colder conditions here along the East Coast. And really, a lot of these areas in the East are colder than the plains, is kind of our current expectation. As we move towards Thursday, which will be the day after Christmas, so December 26th, we see that the snowfall really begins to spread out for the northwest corner of the nation, encompassing a lot of the Sierra Nevada mountains here, the Cascades, the central and northern Rockies there. We also see some thunderstorms and showers taking place across the southern and central plains, and maybe a shower or two here across the southeast as well by Thursday. Friday, on December 27th, what we're seeing is more of this snowfall just continuing for these mountainous areas in the northwest. The overall jet stream by this point will be a lot more of a trough in the west. Subtle ridge in the east here, and we see a lot of showers and Gulf moisture overall beginning for a lot of these eastern areas. So some rainfall with the more mild temperatures. Although, again, the peak of a lot of these ridges here is in the more central states, and then we're seeing a little bit of dippage towards the East Coast for a lot of these areas. So I think the East Coast, we're going to look at the temperatures in a little bit, but I have a feeling they're going to hold on to near normal conditions, if not a little bit below normal throughout a lot of this. And your primary warmer areas are going to be more inland like here. Whereas the West, again, gets bombarded by snowstorms and kind of some off and on cold throughout the upcoming few days. Saturday on the 28th, we're seeing quite a bit of the same. This trough is kind of subtle and transitioning eastward. Now we're seeing some serious warming trend over the East Coast. We get a very weak low here with a cold front underneath, and we're getting showers and thunderstorms kind of surging northward out ahead of this. So again, showers and thunderstorms for this area could certainly be possible. But regardless, heavy rainfall where it's much needed is expected to take place, and continued snowfall in the northwest. That's going to be a common trend today. By Sunday afternoon, what we're seeing is this low begins to form here over the Ohio Valley and Great Lakes here. We get this little bit of a cold front underneath, warm front maybe up above like this. So we're getting the warmth surging up the eastern area here with the cold air kind of sinking underneath everything. And this is not going to be particularly major. That's kind of been my consensus with this one for a while now. But we do get really significant precipitation in this pocket here. Also, the northwest, we continue to get rainfall and mountainous snowfall there as they enter into a very active pattern. It is clear to me, though, by the 29th here, Sunday, I mean, we have a trough along the west coast, but we also have a really decent trough for a lot of these north central and some of the interior eastern states here. Again, the East Coast still holding on to some of that warmth as that cold front hasn't reached yet. As we move towards Monday, though, we see it doesn't just move straight in. This cold air doesn't just continue moving in. What we're actually going to see is it wants to kind of swing around and move back to the north. So it's going to be very short-lived here along the East Coast. Watch it play out. So again, it swings up instead of moving straight in. It's moving straight in for a while there, and then it, boom, swings around. So watch what happens after that cold front. We get some ice, some snow for the northeast, pretty limited to the more mountainous areas. And then we get a more significant low taking place across the Midwest here. Even some snowfall for the plains and upper Midwest as well. This is by Tuesday the 31st. That one moves through the Ohio Valley into the northeast states, and there is some spotty snowfall for a few areas. This really is the catalyst that pulls down a lot of this cold air. And really, for the first and second, we see warmth building here for the southwest. Whereas the cold is spilling into the central and even eastern states by this point. So it's reaching kind of the mid-Atlantic and northeast east coast. We continue to see this move in. A lot of that precipitation moves into the form of snowfall. And because this positive PNA holds so strong out here in the west, we see that our first cool down has gone ahead and swung around, but we already have another one spilling in. So the cold is taking that path continuously, always kind of avoiding this western area here where we have the positive PNA. It's just moving around the east, revolving in that region, which is a sign of serious cold with a lot of longevity as well, would be my consensus with that. Now, what we get is a couple of pieces of energy. Again, kind of going back to what we were talking about a week ago, but this southern piece and this northern piece of energy, and those need to come together for what we saw in the models yesterday, especially this European model, which was a massive East Coast snowstorm in here. What needs to happen is this one needs to move basically right up the coast, just like this. And this northern piece of energy needs to move in as well at the same time and kind of merge with the offshore one. This needs to be the primary low the whole time as it moves through, which we're not going to see. Spoiler alert. We said to expect huge changes and that, it would definitely change. And sure enough, we've seen that. So we do get this low offshore, and it is the primary piece of energy, but it moves in a little too slow, and we see it way offshore. It needs to be like here. We see it moves way too fast offshore, and really we get little to no precipitation in these areas, which are surely below freezing. Almost definitely these areas in here, every single one, southern North Carolina, northern South Carolina, Virginia, the whole entire states here are frigid. We're getting very light precipitation in here, which is able to be rainfall because it's probably pretty close to freezing at the surface. But if there was heavy precipitation, it would pull that cold air down in these areas and be snowfall. Now, of course, the air mass itself is going to change between now and January 5th, and the storm is going to change. So don't take this as gospel. I'm just kind of breaking down this particular model run and what we're looking at here, which is the cold air, cold enough for snowfall in those areas. Storm is too far offshore. Again, expect massive, massive changes. Now, another piece of energy we're watching is this one here, which starts out as a bit of a clipper system from Alberta, moves down into the Rockies. And if you kind of follow the jet stream, it would have some potential to swing around it underneath. We call this a Miller B nor'easter when it kind of starts as a clipper and moves up kind of like off the East Coast halfway up. And this can bring serious snowfall as well to these same areas, Mid-Atlantic and Northeast. So we're going to watch this threat as well. But as we kind of just continue on, we see that storm, that first one is way too far offshore. This one really dies down quickly. We see that the energy is kind of left over here for the deep south states. So let's see what it wants to do here. It's kind of moving, it's sliding along this area, which we've gotten a really flat jet stream in here by this point. It's just like that. So your main areas for potential snowfall would be a flatter region like this at this point for the 6th and 7th. What we see happening though is that a lot of this moisture starts to move back towards the north as we get some low pressure trying to form in this area. These can also either cut in, which is a little hard to do with this cold air, which would bring snowfall into here, or it can kind of meander in, and likely it wouldn't intensify too much until it's offshore, at which point it would bring quite a bit of snowfall. But we see ice and snow pretty far south here. Again, expect huge changes, though. This is nothing like what we'll probably end up seeing. We might end up getting a storm system, but it could be, like, for instance, let's say the low is trying to take place here. It could end up trying to take place here or here or here. So you get this kind of general idea that there will be a storm system. And at the same time, in yellow, there's going to be cold up here. And we're trying to see how these two pieces will interact. But that's how we kind of break down the long range in a way where we can get ideas of what's actually going to happen. Instead of this just being total gibberish and nonsense, we're trying to make sense of it. And that's kind of the way to do it at this point. Now, the GFS model, this is the 18Z model run from today. It's progressively, as we've watched the last few days, been the warmer model, the less snow model, and really it hasn't shown much in the way of major cold in the east. And I think that today, between, I watched the 0Z run from early this morning, the 6Z run from also quite early, the 12Z run, which came out at about 11 or 11:30 a.m., and now the 18Z run, which came out this late afternoon. And it's progressively gotten colder and snowier every single model run that I've watched. So I want to show you where we're at with it right now. And as we take a look, nothing huge is going to be different here for the time being. We get snowfall for the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast again tomorrow morning mostly and overnight. So that looks about the same. Nothing, within a couple days is going to look too different. But as we move forward, we do get a Midwest storm here around the 29th here near Wisconsin. And we get a cold front swinging underneath. Warm front up above, it's quite dry. So we end up with the same thing as the European model showed. Some warmer air tracking up the East Coast. Some colder air trying to move in behind this cold front. But again, I don't think this is the answer for sustained and deep cold air. I don't think we're going to get that from this late December system at all. We do get a bit there for a minute, but again, it slides back up the coast. We get another low moving across, and that one brings some northeast snowfall. We even get another here taking about the same track, moving from the plains in through the Ohio Valley, bringing some of the Great Lakes some snowfall in northeast as well. And then we get another system. What is this, number 4? Developing around Kentucky here, January 4th timeframe, bringing Illinois, Indiana, Michigan some snowfall. At this same point, what we would see on the European model is a much more ridge in the west, trough in the east pattern. We're a little bit sloppy here, or maybe, you know, you could even argue that it's just a little bit too far west with everything compared to what we're seeing on the European model. But regardless, we get this kind of mid-Atlantic northeast snowstorm going, and then the cold air wants to move in. We get with snowstorm number 5 here moving across the Ohio Valley, you know, the plains, get some of it, the Midwest, the Ohio Valley, Great Lakes Northeast here. And then finally, by the 8th, we arrive at something that looks quite a bit like what the European model is calling for. Very expansive cold across a lot of the Rockies, Plains, Midwest, Great Lakes, Ohio Valley, and Mid-Atlantic and Northeast as well, with the West Coast being slightly warmer. It's a very small area there, but this forces the cold air into these eastern areas. And this is all due to that SSW we were talking about, sudden stratospheric warming event. This causes the Arctic, basically air mass that's constantly over the Arctic Circle, to move down into the lower latitudes. And what we're seeing here is cold, severe cold. And it's actually quite expansive. We talk a lot about how these thinner Arctic air masses, like if it was like this instead, are oftentimes deeper. But when the whole Arctic air mass is basically moving down a polar vortex, it allows for these wider range cold events, and that's exactly what we're seeing here. So perhaps we end up with something like this. When we look at the European model, it doesn't look too far off. I mean, we have that very wide cold area here, and we have it on the GFS model as well. So when both models show it, and we have some reason to believe that something like this would be especially possible in the upcoming pattern, you don't just toss it out. You consider, you know, hey, maybe we do end up with something like this. Total precipitation, we do see the Northwest doing quite well, especially coastal areas like they tend to do. That is above normal precipitation, and a lot of areas here in the east are going to end up above average as well, with multiple inches of precipitation overall expected over the next 15 or so days. So here's the anomalies, and what we see is the Northwest, again, well above average, and that extends into the Rockies here as we get pretty frequent storms moving across this area. We also see quite a few systems moving up into the Midwest and Great Lakes, also up into the Northeast. And this ends up giving us near average to above average precipitation in a lot of the East as well. Now, total snowfall in the European model, we have monstrous amounts out west, and that actually extends a bit into the plains, a lot more than it typically does, where we're seeing, you know, a foot to 2 feet in some of these pink areas like Nebraska, South Dakota, eastern Wyoming, eastern Colorado, looking a bit snowier for them. I think there's a lot of big question marks across this pocket that I'm drawing in here, but we do see mountainous areas continuing to see some snowfall in here. Again, this low that was bringing a major snowstorm went just too far offshore, whereas yesterday we saw it actually do something a lot more like this, which is a massive difference in one run. So you keep in mind, I always tell you guys, you know, we only need 50 or 100 miles change, and you're like, that's so much. But look at the difference in one run, or 1 day worth of runs at least, that we're seeing in the difference. I mean, the distance is crazy here that we're seeing just between 24 hours. It could easily trend back west, further east, further north, further south. I mean, there is huge changes that can potentially take place here. We have to consider that it's not only in the less snowy direction. Things can trend in the snowier direction, of course. What we see on the GFS model is the same amount of just monstrous snowfall out west, but we do get a couple of snow systems that want to move through just like this, and we actually get like, you know, 2, 3, 4 of these, and this leads to feet of snowfall across a very similar area, the Midwest, Great Lakes, Canada, and then the interior Northeast here, seeing a ton. But if we get a colder couple of runs, it could instantly, you know, change into something like this, or even like this. So that is not a huge change, especially when we're talking about, you know, 200, 300, almost 400 hours out. We can see things change in that way, and I do expect to see some changes regardless of what direction or how much of it we see. There will be changes. Now, the temperature pattern first off, on our European model, again, it's much colder. And pay attention because, again, this area here, not the whole thing and not the whole time, but it does hold on to the cold much better throughout this model run. And then a lot of the west is going to cool down at certain points as well. So let's watch it. Notice how the interior east is yellow and orange here, but we continue to see that immediate east coast staying blue or green for a while. This is the 28th, and we still haven't seen a hugely warm pattern until about the 29th, 30th, where we do get pretty hugely warm, until about the 1st, 2nd, 3rd here, where we start to get cold air infused again. And right about here, the 5th is when things look to really be cycling into a very, very cold pattern in the east. We have warmer temperatures trending in for the west. Cool down number 1 already over the southeast, and we get cool down number 2 trying to move in right behind it, which could make things more expansive. It could kind of take over the same areas, but regardless, Arctic blast after Arctic blast just taking aim at the east here. And look at how expansive this is by the end of the model run. I mean, we have the west, the central, and the east much colder than normal. It's really just this south central area seeing some warmth. So really we end up with a deeply Arctic pattern for coast to coast, almost the entire United States, which is ridiculous. GFS model. The east coast holds on to some of that cold a little bit, but here's the 27th, 28th, and we're already warming. So a little warmer here in that last days. 1st, 2nd, 3rd, we're still warmer. Get some colder temperatures in there around the 4th, 5th. And then here comes the actual cold by the time we're looking at the 7th, 8th. And we end up with something that looks similar to the European model. European model on the 7th. Here's the GFS model on the 8th, so a 1-day difference. But they both end up with this deep Arctic air in the central especially, but also the east. We're getting these colder temperatures by the time we're reaching kind of like the end of that first week of January. So definitely something that we're watching for. And here's the European weekly model. It's a little bit of a more long range model, and it runs in 7-day increments. So we take a look at the 27th through the 3rd, much warmer in the east. And then here's the 3rd through the 10th. So we expect a huge flip. This looks a lot similar to what, first off, the National Weather Service is calling for, but not only that, what the European model and the GFS model are showing. So to get this ensemble support is really good. And what we see is continued cold. It gets even worse as we move towards the 7th through the 14th, so the 2nd week of January. Then here's the 14th through the 21st, which still looks cold in the east. Now, here's the GFS extended model. Again, 27th through the 3rd. Here's the 3rd through the 10th. Again, almost the same. Let's look at the European extended model for the 3rd through the 10th. Look at that. I mean, what are the differences? The European weekly model, GFS weekly model. And again, this is 12 days out, basically. 12 to 19 days out. I mean, this is crazy stuff that we're seeing here. Really similar. And what we see when we continue is also pretty similar things. Here's the 7th through the 14th. 14th through the 21st, all pointing towards cold in the east. Even our CFS model, which is another long-range model, here is the 27th through the 3rd, very warm in the east. 3rd through the 10th, suddenly like the flip of a switch, we're colder in the east, and much colder at that. Here's the 7th through the 14th, this model showing even colder conditions in the east. And then here's the 14th through the 21st, where we're still cold. So if we're looking at weeks 1, 2, and 3 being colder in January, congratulations, you have a colder January on your hands. Even if that fourth and final week is very warm, it won't be able to outmatch that first 21 days of January being colder. So we're going to end up with a colder December. We end up with a colder January. That's 2 out of 3 months. You basically are almost guaranteed to have a colder winter overall. So really interesting developments here for the overall winter, and I think that we're going to cash in on some snow as well, at least 1 or 2 during that 3-week period of January that we expect stronger chances of cold than normal. I think we're definitely moving into a wintry pattern, and December has been quite wintry for many folks. I think January it's only going to get worse. I can see the comments now, like, of course January is going to be more wintry than December, but it doesn't always go that way. This is compared to normal that we're talking about. So this is colder than normal for what is normal for January. And snowier than normal is perhaps what we expect as well. So definitely not typical December transition to January weather. Anyway, with all that being said, we will keep you guys up to date with all of these things. So be sure to subscribe. We upload every single day. You can even hit the bell icon for daily notifications when we upload so you never miss one. Be sure to like the video if you did enjoy it, leave a comment down below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.